Hello again, everyone. In this video, we're going to be using Blender to make a retro-style rocket ship. Up to this point, we've really only been using tinkercad.com, which is a pretty straightforward tool. And one of the first things you will probably notice upon opening Blender is how wildly different it is. Even at just a first glance, you can see that it's just a much more complex and more powerful tool than Tinkercad is. Just to go over it, briefly, all of its various functions. You can render scenes, you can sculpt models, animation, video editing. It's just a huge 3D and video editing tool. It's really powerful. It's really complex. But don't get too wrapped up in that because we're really just focusing on making a static model for the purposes of 3D printing. So like, 95% of all the crazy stuff you see here, we're not really going to be touching. And downloading Blender. Going back to the browser here, go to blender.org/download. It'll bring you to this screen. It will default to Windows operating system download. So if you do have Windows, just click download. You can see it comes out at the bottom there. So just click that when it finishes downloading. Some things will automatically run, follow the prompts, and it'll install. Pretty much the same thing if you're on Mac or Linux, but you would just click this drop-down menu here, select the version you need, and yeah, same thing. Download it, run the installer, follow the prompts, and once it, finishes and you launch it, it'll bring you back to this screen. I will also say this is the most open-ended design up to this point. The keychain, you're basically making a rectangle. The sliding lid box has a very definitive shape. How this looks will really be entirely up to you. There's no kind of base shape that we're going for. That said, I'll bring up a couple examples that I made here. As you can see, we have two rockets of varying sizes, and the big one has 6 boosters going around it, and those fins along the side. Small one only has 3. It's got a little window or doorway there. I'll go over how to design these, the methods used in the upcoming video, so let's get started. Alright, so you've downloaded Blender. Just gonna take care of a couple things quickly here. The pop-up window here, you can just click anywhere else on an empty space, it'll go away. We're also not going to be using the cube. It should be highlighted by default, so just hit X on your keyboard. This window pops up, just click delete, away it goes. And we're also going to be using a lot of keyboard shortcuts for this video, one of which does default to the numpad. So if you are using a full keyboard and it has a numpad, you don't need to follow this step. Otherwise, you can follow my cursor here, click on the Edit tab up here, all the way down to Preferences, and on the Input tab, as you can see I have it ticked already here, but just make sure Emulate Numpad is ticked. X that off, and we can start designing. Alright, first thing we want to do, you can follow my cursor here. We're going to click on Add up near the upper left. Going to hover over Mesh and go over to Circle. Click on that and it will place an empty circle in the middle here. And it's a little too small to work with, so the very first thing we want to do is scale it up to make it easier to work with. So if you hit S on your keyboard, S for scale, and then move your mouse either left or right or up and down. You can see we can make it bigger or smaller. So we just want to make it a little bit bigger. We don't want it to be huge. Kind of just, a few to several of these squares deep should be plenty. And then a few ways over from add, we're going to click on this drop-down menu that says object mode. And we're going to select edit mode. Then we're going to hit F on the keyboard for fill. That will make our circle a nice solid object. And then this is where the emulate numpad step we did earlier will come into play. So if you have a numpad, you can just hit 3 on it, and it will snap to the right orthographic view. And if you don't have a numpad, just hit the 3, above the QWER. And you'll know you're in the right spot by going up here. It should say right orthographic. And at this point, it will probably be helpful to think about, at least generally, what you want your rocket to look like. Do you want the bottom to be wide or narrow? Do you want it to go in and out? Maybe you want like the midsection to be really wide, or you want it to be a really, thin piece that gets like drawn to a point at the top. Either way, feel free to pause this video at this point and think about it for a bit. So as an example, I'll say I want the bottom of my rocket to be narrow. I'm going to have a wider, I guess, midsection, and then I'll draw it to a point at the top. Basically, we're going to do this by pulling up tiny sections and then kind of flaring them in and out. So first, I'm going to use my mouse wheel and just zoom out a little bit so I have a better view. And I'm going to hit E on my keyboard, and if I move the mouse up, I can see I'm now dragging up a section of the circle. It's best to work in tiny sections to get the desired shape. So like I said, I want a narrow bottom, so let's pull up a flat piece. And just left click when you have it how you want it, it will lock it into place. And I'm going to pull up another small piece, but this time I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. And moving my mouse left or right, you can see you can flare it out or in. So I want narrow, I'm going to flare it in a little bit. Let's pull up another section. Flare it inwards. And we'll keep doing this. I think one more section will look pretty good here. Alright, so there is the bottom of my rocket. And I will say, as you go forward, something to keep in mind is the undo and redo hotkeys. So if you hold down Control and tap Z, you will undo a step every time you hit Z. So if you get to a certain point and you really don't like how it looks, just backtrack until you get to a point where you can, re-edit it into something that is more what you want. And if you accidentally go too far, just hold down Control, hold down Shift, and then tap Z to redo the step. All right, and I'm gonna finish this rocket using these exact same steps. Zoom out a little bit to get a better view here. And just like I was doing, E, just pull up a piece, left click to lock, E, and then we'll gradually flare it out. So E, S, click. E, S, click. And so on. Obviously, remember you have the undo, redo buttons to kind of backtrack and redo. So let's see. I think we're approaching the midsection here, so let's start really widening it out. Will probably almost look like a vase or a cup for a while here until you get to the top. Just keep going though. E, click, S, click. Alright, I'm gonna start bringing this to the top. So we'll get a nice flat piece in the middle there. Then I'll start drawing it to a point, just pulling it in. And keep zooming out as your rocket gets bigger. Alright, so for the final piece, let's pull up a fairly tall section here. We'll draw it right to a point. One thing to keep in mind at this step, especially if you are drawing a rocket to a point, is you don't want to go too far and twist it. That twist will not play well at all with a 3D printer. The object will fail and get messy. So don't go that far. Stop just before it. Click. And there is kind of the main body of our little retro toy rocket ship. With the main object done, we can now focus on making the kind of little rocket boosters that are going to go along the side here. So we need to do a couple of things first before we get going on that. First, where we were on edit mode, we're going to change this back to object mode. And second, what's known as the cursor, this kind of red and white circle. I'll zoom in here for you a little bit, make it more clear. If that has somehow wound up anywhere else on your screen, just hold down Shift, tap S, and it'll bring up this little kind of selection of pop-up windows. Click on Cursor to Active, and it should snap back to the center for you, which is what we want. Making sure that's centered, we're now going to go back to the Add tab here. We're going to add an empty circle and add once again, but we're going to add mesh and circle. And we will want to break the orthographic view for just a little bit here. So what I'm actually going to do is click down on my mouse wheel, move it to get a better viewpoint here. And on the kind of left side tab here, I'm going to click these like 4 facing arrows to move the object. I'm going to move this tiny little circle a decent distance off to the side. And like we did with our main object, we're going to scale it up. Not nearly as big, but just a little bit. And we're going to go back to edit mode, pretty much just like we did with the main object. We're going to hit F to make it a solid, and we're going to hit 3 to go to the orthographic. And just like we did with our main object here, I'm going to use ES and left click pull up tiny sections and shape up the rocket booster. Obviously we want it to be much smaller than the main rocket, although you don't, truthfully it can be as big or as small as you want it, but I'm gonna make it on the small side, so just improv an object there. Okay. With the single booster shaped how you want it, basically the next steps we're going to do are connecting this to the main rocket and then kind of duplicating it and rotating it around the main piece. So before we do that, first and foremost, I guess we just want to make sure that the booster is actually positioned where you want it. So maybe you have it, way too close, they're actually mashed together, or you put it way over here. Fix is pretty easy. On the Edit Mode tab, just click that, go back to Object Mode, and you should come right back to the Move option here. If you're not, just select the 4 facing arrows again. And I'll zoom in to get a better view. Hold down, left click on the green arrow, and move your booster into place. So I'll make sure it's decently close here. Looks good. Go back to edit mode. And I'm going to break orthographic view again. So holding down on my mouse wheel, zoom in a bit to get a better view here. What we basically want to do is select 4 faces that are directly across from the main rocket. So what we want to do is first change to faces. So these 3 buttons up where my cursor is. The one on the far right is face select. Click that. And the easiest thing to do is it should be perfectly matched along the green line there. So kind of look at the green line and you want to select the 2 faces that go along with it. So for me, I think that's going to be kind of these 4 up here. So I'm going to left click my first one, then I'm going to hold down Shift and select all 4. I think that's pretty good. All right, zoom out a little bit. Hit 3 to go back to orthographic view, and then I'm going to hit E to extrude this into the rocket. And depending on how you designed it, it might look a little off. As you can see, mine's, jutting through the bottom right now. But that's pretty easy. Just make sure it's mashed into the rocket. And then we're going to click Move here on the left-hand side. And just like with object mode, we can use these blue and green arrows to kind of position it better. So obviously I'm going to move it up. Do you want it straight facing? Do you want it angled up a little bit? I think I'll angle mine up just a little bit. I think that's good. We can go back to regular select. Okay. One little thing before we get to replicating this booster. I'm going to break orthographic view to kind of go to the bottom here. And we're still set to faces. We want to create the little gap here at the bottom that, the rocket blast and fire will come out of. So to do that, just left click on the bottom here. It will select the entire face. Hit E, but then don't move your mouse. You might actually want to take your hand off the mouse. You can right click if you accidentally plunged it somewhere. So I canceled that. E, not moving the mouse. Just left click once, just creates an extra face for us. We're going to hit S to scale and just push it in however big or small you want this part to be. So I'm going to keep it reasonably big. Left click to lock it in. And we can move up a little bit. And then we're going to hit E to push it up. And you'll kind of have to eyeball how tall you want this to be. We can't get all the way in there, and obviously we don't want to push it all the way up. So just stop before that, left click, and yep, there's the piece. And now we can get to duplicating. And now, finally, for the step of duplicating the booster and rotating it around the main object. So first, we're going to go from edit mode to object mode. With the booster selected, we're going to hold down Control and tap A. That will bring up this window. Click on either location, rotation, or scale. It doesn't matter. Just click one, and this window will come up here. The keyboard might be blocking it. The keyboard overlay, I mean. But you should see something towards the bottom of your screen that says Apply Object Transformation, or Apply Object Transform. Just click that, it will expand the window, and now just make sure to tick Location, Rotation, and Scale. And you can click it again to shrink it back down. And then on the right-hand side, but not all the way, we have this very long list of buttons. We want to click on the wrench. I'll keep my cursor over it for just a bit so you can follow along. I'm going to click the wrench, add modifier. We'll bring up this huge window. And we want the very first thing under generate, which is array, right here. When we do that, it will bring up another little window here. So first, we want to uncheck relative offset. We're going to check object offset and click the little arrow next to it to expand it. And next to object is like a blank little window, but we can click that and it'll bring up a list of the objects we're working with. Set it to empty. And then lastly, towards the top here, we have count. This is basically the number of rocket boosters you're going to produce. So do you want 3 going around the main rocket, 2? You could probably go as high as 6, maybe 8 if your rocket booster is pretty small. I will go with an even 4. And once you have the number and object offset set, we're actually going to hit 7 on the keyboard to get the top orthographic view. And then hit R on the keyboard, move the mouse left to right, up and down. It's a little finicky, but you can see we're now rotating our duplicated rocket boosters around the rocket. And you can do pretty much as you please right now. If you want it to be nice and even, the best thing to do is probably try and line them up with the, red and green lines going across. But it obviously doesn't have to be that way. You can have it set like that if you want. Or you can even go like that. I'll elect to keep things as even as I can, so just line them up with the green and red lines here. Once you got it lined up, just left click. That will lock it into place. Then all we need to do is apply this modifier. So back on the pop-up window here, next to the X, we do not want to click the X, but next to that, a little drop-down arrow. We can click Apply. And now I'll break the orthographic view, and you can see the boosters are duplicated, rotated around, and locked into place. And final bits of customization, the window or doorway, the fins, and exporting the object. So before we do anything else, we want to make sure that this is like a single continuous object. So just select the rocket boosters, hold down Shift, left click the main rocket, and then just hold down Control, hit J for join. That will join them together. Alright, let's go into edit mode. And you will probably also realize that we do not have, the rocket blast fire gap like we have in here. So just like we did on these, let's select this bottom face, tap E without moving, left click, S for scale, scale it inward, and E, and just push it up. Alright, and while we're on faces here, let's do the window or doorway. So you can kind of rotate around and pretty much just pick any spot you want. If you want it lined up with a booster, maybe you want to put it in between. And the idea is to kind of just select 4 to 6 faces in a square shape. So I'll make it pretty big. Oops. Let's do 6 here. And it could be bigger than this, you could go up to 9 or 12. It's as big or small as you want it. But kind of like how we did earlier, select one face, hold down Shift, select the others. This will be the kind of general shape of it. Like we did with the kind of rocket blast gap areas, hit E, don't move the mouse, left click, scale that extra face in a bit, and then just E to push it in. And there's a little window or doorway. And as for the fins that could potentially go along the side, I think the easiest thing to do is to kind of we're going to follow the red and green lines going along here. And we're also going to change to edges. So up here where we had faces, vertexes, the one in the middle, select edges. And we're going to follow the green line here. And what we want to do is the edges are kind of these little black lines going all along and around our object. So basically try to just follow the vertical edges that'll kind of follow the green lines. So kind of have to eyeball it a little bit, but I'm going to go with that one. So let's see, let's follow it up a bit. And again, as big or as small as you want it. Select one at the bottom, hold down Shift, and keep selecting the additional edges. And then what we can actually do is hit 3 to go back to the right orthographic view. We're going to select Move, and just use the green and blue arrows to kind of push out. And, you can push it up or down if you want. Maybe I'll push it up a little bit. Okay. We'll go back to select. And then to duplicate that on the other side, just try and follow. Basically just want to try and pick the same vertices. So I'm pretty sure I'd add that would be the bottom. Let's select all the pieces. I believe I stopped one below the very top. And unfortunately, I don't know of an easy way to do this like we did with the array modifier and the boosters. So you kind of just have to, select the same edges and then just kind of eyeball it. So be right about there. I believe I've tilted it up a little bit. Maybe in just a bit. And actually it does look like I selected the wrong bottom piece. But that's totally fine. Like I was saying at the beginning of the video, just undo it, go back, and you can actually hold down Shift, click that bottom one to deselect it, and then you would just snap back and redo it. And if you want 4 all around, you would do the same thing following the red line there, and selecting the corresponding edges. But when you get to the point of pulling it out, you would just hit 1 on the keyboard instead of 3. That would give you the edges going along that side there. And that is pretty much it for designing and customizing this rocket. Last step, if you're a Wayland Library patron, you've designed it, you want to get it 3D printed, just go up to File, and hover over Export, select STL, and you could name it, and just make note of where it's saving, and yeah, then find and attach that file to an email, and I'll 3D print it for you.